Good morning, everyone. How are you? I hope everyone's good morning, at least here in Poland. I hope everyone is in a good mood and ready to start work. If you're there, then just say hello on the chat just to let me know that you're there, and also just to let me know if you can hear everything that's going on. Make sure that my sound is working okay. And if you have any other problems or any kind of technical problems, or if I look bad, or there's anything I can do to improve the picture or improve the sound, then please just let me know. Okay, we'll just wait just a few more seconds before we get stuck into the questions. Unfortunately, yes, just a quick word about Facebook. I thought I would be able to live stream to both Facebook and YouTube at the same time, but it seems like that at the moment that's not possible. Although I hope next week to have a workaround for that, so I can both publish to or go live on Facebook and to YouTube at the same time, because I understand it's a bit of a nuisance having to swap between channels. Of course, I'd like to be everywhere at the same time, but unfortunately that I only realized just a few minutes before we started that that's not going to happen. I'm just going to write a message on Facebook now to say that we've started. Okay. I'll just have a drink of water and then let's begin. Okay, so I asked you to have a look. Oops. I asked, let's just get the PowerPoint up and running. Okay. I asked you to have a look at 3 different questions which I posted, or 3 different texts which I posted on Facebook yesterday. And all 3 of the texts had a different problem. All of them are related to the active voice. And all of these are questions that I've taken from my website, writtenlegaleNglish.com. In a future webcast, I'll walk you through my website so you can see what it looks like on the inside, what kind of things that you can do there, what the exercises look like, what kind of feedback you can expect from me, and what kind of vocabulary exercises there are as well, because I've got exercises for prepositions, collocations, and something else as well, which I forget. But there's three kind of word games that you can play online as well as links to all of the YouTube material that I produce, LinkedIn articles that I did, and so on. So let's go through the first of these questions. And this is, I'll just read through it. You will provide us with all records and information requested by us. This is a pretty angry sounding sentence, quite a demand, as a matter of fact. Not the nicest thing to read in the contract. And of course, the problem with this is that this is bad use of the passive. We don't really need to use the passive here. And it's a little bit of a confused sentence, because actually, if you can probably see my arrow there, you can actually see that they've used an active form here. You will provide us. So this is an active form. But then we've got this kind of passive structure at the end, by us. Sentence seems a little bit confused, kind of active into passive. So if we were just going to fix this sentence or improve this sentence just as it is, then perhaps the first thing we would say is, you will provide us with all records and information we request. Or we could say that we request as well. Which gives it, which then turns the sentence into being active and active rather than active and passive. But this isn't really solving the problem. I mean, it solves the problem of the misuse of the passive, but it doesn't really solve the problem of communicating what it is that really has to be communicated. So we've got to think a little bit more about what that might be. But before we get onto that, let's just see if we can make this sentence a little bit nicer, because even though we've made this an active and active, both parts of the sentence being active, it still is quite a demand. So we could improve this by saying, please provide us with all records and information we request. There's a please in there, and this is important because English as a language follows certain protocols as regards etiquette. English as, in terms of communication, English is better if the requests are given as formal requests, or at least in a polite manner. So demands generally don't come across that well in English, or at least they come across as quite rude. So we've got to pay attention to the language that we use in terms of requesting something from somebody else. And this goes into the wider discussion of using indirect question forms, which is a different topic. In fact, there's a video that I do on indirect question forms on my YouTube channel. So if you want to find out a little bit more about indirect question forms, then dig out that video to find out how you should ask, how you should phrase a question. But this still doesn't really solve the problem. I mean, it solves the problem as far as we've got active voice now, and we've made the sentence a little bit nicer. It's not quite the demand it was at the beginning, but we can still make a better, we can still make some changes to this sentence to make this sentence a lot nicer, a lot better, and basically communicate the information in a much better way. And one way that we can do this is by using conditional structures. And so one of my suggestions in terms of improving this sentence would be to say something like this. If we need any records or information, please can you send them to us, or you must send them to us. And that, in terms of tone, is a lot nicer. And I think it gets to the main message of what this sentence is really trying to say. If we have a look at the initial sentence, we can see we've got this verb here, request. If they request something, well, they need something from you, simply speaking. So why can't we just say need? Request is a rather formal language. Need is still formal. It's everyday. Everyone understands need. There might be some people who have difficulties with request as a verb, but need is a verb that everyone understands. And we've got a nice simple conditional structure. If we need any records, please can you send them to us? The tone is a lot nicer. We communicate exactly the same thing, and the reader will read this and understand what they've got to do if something happens, and also the tone is acceptable for the reader as well. Now, you might decide that this is an obligation, because please can you might not be strong enough, so we can say you must. So this is it's not overly aggressive, but nevertheless it sets the obligation to respond to the request if a request is made. So in terms of correcting this sentence, working out what this sentence is trying to say, then I think this redraft at the bottom is not a bad way to deal with that. Okay, let's just quickly have a look at the YouTube there, see if there's any comments. If you've got any comments, of course, or if you've got any questions, or indeed if I'm talking away and you can't hear me, there's a problem with the sound, then please get in contact and let me know. Okay, so the second question that I asked you to have a look at, if I can get this going, is we recommend including in the lease agreements the detailed list of services and cost items all covered by the service charges. Sounds a little bit, it sounds okay. It's not perfect, and I'll tell you the reason why. Whereas in the first example, what we had was the misuse of the passive. Here we've got an ordering problem, and I'll explain why. Let me just drag across my little Word document here so we can see this. Let's break down this sentence a little bit to work out what the problem is. So we've got our subject, which is we. And then we've got our verb or verb structure, which is recommend. So we recommend including. The question you've got to ask yourself is, what do we recommend including? Because what follows is in the lease agreements. And that sounds, to me, it just sounds a little bit strange. We recommend including in the lease agreements. I still don't know what it is that we need that's been recommended that needs to be included straight away. What I get here is we recommend including, and then what I'm expecting is what should be included. But I don't get that information. I get something else. I get a location where this information should go. And that order, in terms of logical structure, seems a little bit strange to me. We recommend including where, what, which doesn't really sound that natural to me. Grammatically, it's fine, we can say this, but it doesn't sound particularly natural. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. After the verb, we should have an object. But there are two types of objects. There are direct objects and there are indirect objects. If you are not so sure about direct objects and indirect objects, there's plenty of information on the internet where you can have a look at this in a little bit more detail. But I'll just quickly explain what a direct object is. A direct object is the thing which is directly influenced by the verb. So in this case, we recommend including what, and that what is the direct object. And if we have a look at the sentence, the what, the direct object, is the detailed list of services and cost items covered by the service charges. All of this is the what. And the indirect object is the extra information which is not directly, or the extra thing which is not directly influenced by the main verb, which is recommend including. So this would commonly be things like where this information should be, and that's exactly what the indirect object is in this case. It is the lease agreement. So what we have here is a sentence structure which is subject, verb, indirect object, which is the lease agreement, and then we have the direct object, which, as I said, sounds a little bit strange. The preferred sentence structure should be subject, verb, direct object, followed by an indirect object. Because that sounds, as I said, a little bit more normal, a little bit more natural, and a little bit more logical. So we recommend including what, where. So here the answer, or my revision to this sentence, would be we recommend including the detailed list of services and cost items covered by the service charges in the lease agreements. And that arrangement of information seems to me to be a little bit more logical and a little bit more understandable. What do you think about that? If you've got any comments, if you disagree with me, if this is a problem, because I see that particularly this is a problem in Polish, or this is rather, I should say, this is something that I regularly meet with Polish lawyers who translate from Polish into English or form English structures is that you have this arrangement of indirect objects before direct objects. And I understand the arguments from that from the Polish point of view. I won't go into it in this video. And indeed, in terms of English grammar, you can also have indirect objects before direct objects. Grammatically, there's nothing wrong with this first sentence. It's absolutely fine. No, there's no errors grammatically. It's more of a question of what sounds a little bit better. And certainly, if in this case the indirect object is quite short in the lease agreement, and then the direct object is quite long, the detailed list of services, etc., etc. But it can be the case where the indirect object is quite long, and the direct object then gets lost at the end of the sentence, and then you have to read through lots and lots of information before you get through to the direct object. And what you have there is a long sentence, and as you're reading, you're still asking yourself the question, what does the main verb affect? What does the main verb modify? And it can be quite confusing when you read a sentence which is quite long, which is full of clauses, and the direct object is right at the end of the sentence, and you're kind of thinking, okay, hang on, I've got to read this again because I don't quite know what's going on. So if we put the direct object straight after the verb, or very close after the verb, then that sentence becomes a little bit easier, well, not just a little bit, but in many cases a lot easier to understand. So this idea of having subject, verb, direct object and indirect object is, I would suggest, perhaps a preferred style technique for writing legal English. Now, when I was researching information for my website and when I was teaching over the last couple of years, I was delighted to read an article in a publication. It was a lady who teaches plain English in a law firm, I think it was in Mexico or Argentina, who said exactly this, who said direct objects must come before indirect objects. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen in writing someone confirm what I thought was perhaps a better structure, or at least a more logical structure. And straight away I wrote to her and I said, this is great that you wrote that. Can you tell me a little bit more about where you found your information for this? Because I was trying to find information on the internet about where direct object should come before the indirect object and so on. And I couldn't find anything, or nothing particularly persuasive or convincing. And so I wrote to her and I said, tell me more about this, because I agree with you 100%. And it was an article that she wrote a good few years ago. I think it was a publication 2009, 2010. And she was surprised that I was getting so excited about this. But unfortunately, she couldn't come up with any concrete articles or research or people who would say do this. But it's very much a kind of a shared logical way of thinking about things. And as I said, on my website, there's a number of exercises where we go through changing the order of indirect object and direct object, because it just makes more logical sense doing that. But anyhow, so the problem, I guess, here in this example is one of a style issue more than anything, because when both forms of grammar are correct, then this becomes a style issue. And I accept that argument of style, because there might be some people who say this and the indirect object can go before the direct object and there's no problems here. And I could be persuaded by that argument in the context of this example. But if we go back to this example where someone would say to me, Simon, this is absolutely correct and there's nothing wrong with this, and this is just a question of style, I would have more problems with that because I can see that this is misuse of the passive, or rather this is a passive-esque structure, and it doesn't have to be written in this way, and it doesn't benefit anyone by being written in this way. So I would say that this would need to be redrafted, and I certainly would redraft this. Whereas if we go forward, if we go to this one, then okay, if I was talking to a lawyer who drafted this, and that lawyer put his foot down and said, "No, Simon, this is how it must be," then okay, I would let this one slide. So the style argument is an argument which is a difficult argument, and it's an argument that I actually come across quite a lot, because when I criticize or when I critique writing, very often the response I get back is it's a question of style. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes it's just badly written and it should be redrafted. But okay, well, I've perhaps waffled on a little bit too much about that. So let's have a look at the final one. Oh, hello, a second. I've got a comment there. Thank you from Dr. Law. Yes, I'd be happy to give you more examples, and certainly over the next couple of weeks, I'll be doing a webinar every week with different examples to explain different problems, different issues that I meet as a proofreader, or different issues that exist in legal English, to show you the scope of the problem. And I can see you say that you're a Spanish speaker in the comments, and this is important because I'm based in Poland. I do lots of work with Polish lawyers, and very much I hear Polish lawyers say, "It's because I'm Polish, I don't understand this," or very commonly I hear this excuse, "The language is very sophisticated and that's why I don't understand it." And I have huge problems with this because it's not that Polish lawyers don't understand it because the language is sophisticated. It's because it's badly written. And the test is very simple. When I was working at the law firm, very often someone would call me up and say, "Simon, come here. I don't understand what this person is trying to say." And I would go along and I would read the document and I would say, "Well, I don't know what they're trying to say either." And this was very often an American lawyer or a British lawyer who had written a document, and it was just terribly drafted. And when you read a terribly drafted document, you don't know what the author is trying to say. So there's a very common misconception that lawyers from America and Britain write perfect legal English, and that foreigners or people who speak English as a second language or third language, it must be their problem because they don't understand English. No. This is a problem because it's simply badly drafted legal English. And you can see there's lots of literature about plain English or rewriting legal English, particularly from America, from Australia, and from lots of other English-speaking jurisdictions around the world, all criticizing their own lawyers for writing bad legal English. And not only that, there are many interviews with judges from all different levels of the court hierarchy, and all of the judges are saying, or most of the judges are saying the same thing, and that is, keep it simple, organize your arguments correctly, don't give us anything that we don't need, don't fill it full of legalese, don't fill it full of complicated structures, keep it short and get to the point. And this is a very common comment by judges, and I perhaps will post a number of links to a number of different interviews with judges who say exactly this. But for some reason in practice, lawyers have difficulties understanding this message, have difficulties accepting this message. So I just wanted to go off on a tangent there to say that this isn't this isn't a non-native problem. This is a native problem, even more so than a non-native, because non-native lawyers have a talent sometimes of keeping something rather simple, and then they complain it's not complicated enough, and then anyway, that's a different argument. But so thank you very much for your comment. And let's move on to the final question that I asked you to have a look at. And it was quite a long one. And by the way, all of these examples that I found for the website that I put together all came from Google. There was these are readily available information from Google, from statutes. A lot of this information, I took care to make sure I took texts from American jurisdiction, British jurisdiction, Australian, etc. So this is across the English-speaking jurisdictions around the world. So this particular one, it comes from a state in America. I forget which now, but it says, if I read through it, before licensing any person to write insurance in this state, the Commissioner shall be satisfied by such examination and evidence as the Commissioner decides to make and require that the person is otherwise duly qualified under the laws of the state to transact business in this state. Now, the first problem was kind of misuse of a passive-esque sentence. The second problem was the order of the direct object and the indirect object. The problem for this, basically, is what's the main point that's being made here? Where is the main message? Where's the subject? Where's the verb? Where's the object? And in terms of their location, are they close together? Is it easy to understand what the main point of this sentence is? There's a lot of information here. So when you read this sentence straight away, or when you read this sentence for the first time, you're thinking, what's going on here? What information do I concentrate on first? Okay, the beginning bit is straightforward. Before licensing any person to write insurance in this state. Okay. And then we have a potential subject. So we've got the Commissioner. Okay, the Commissioner shall be satisfied. Okay, so we're thinking, okay, the Commissioner must be happy. The Commissioner must have some tests. And indeed, this is what we see next. By such examination and evidence, so there has to be some exams, there has to be some evidence, as the Commission decides to make and require. So the Commissioner's got to think what that examination and evidence is. And then he gets a choice in applying whatever tests he would like. That the person is otherwise duly qualified under the laws of the state to transact business in the state. What's this trying to get at? Basically, the message is the Commissioner has got tests which they will apply to make sure the person who wants to write insurance in the state can write insurance in the state. This is the basic message, which is quite a complicated basic message. So then you're thinking, okay, then how can I adequately communicate this in writing? The first thing I would say is we've got to think about sentences here. This is all put together in one sentence. So all of this information is put together. Now, this is a problem which is called over-particularization. Over-particularization is exactly that. It's where you're putting too much information into a sentence. And over-particularization is bad because it's difficult to understand. So we've got to break down this information. So we've got to break it down into sentences. We've got to think about what are the main points, who are the actors, where are my verbs, and who is affected by my verbs. And this sentence is also confusing from the point of view that I said that Commissioner is a potential subject. Well, there is another potential subject, and that is the person who wants to write insurance in the state. So there's two ways of approaching this sentence. We can either create a sentence where the Commissioner is the subject, or we can create a sentence or sentences in which the person who writes insurance or wants to write insurance is the subject. And both of them are quite legitimate. I mean, we could come to the same end result, I think, starting off with either subject. So as a result, I think there are a number of ways that we can improve this sentence based on the fact that we have to break down the sentence, this one sentence, into a number of different points. So this is what I suggested, and of course other suggestions might be equally valid. This is just how I dealt with this. So I focused on the person who wants to write insurance as the main subject. So I wrote, a person who wants to write insurance in this state must satisfy the commissioner that he or she is duly qualified under the laws of the state to transact business in this state. Okay, it's still a bit of a mouthful of a sentence, but there is one main point, and that is you've got to satisfy the commissioner that you can transact business in this state. The second related point then changes the focus because now the commissioner becomes the subject. So the commissioner can choose to use any examination or evidence of his/her choosing to achieve this. You might argue that that second sentence perhaps is an oversimplification. Maybe it is. I can listen to that argument, and certainly we can make changes to that sentence. But the general idea is that this is now a lot more manageable in terms of being able to read it and being able to understand it. Let me just pop this over here. So we've broken down one sentence into two sentences. We've broken down the points. So we've got, I think, one, maybe 2 points in the first sentence, 1 point in the second sentence. And this becomes, we've got active structures throughout. So this then becomes a lot easier to digest. And how do we get to this point? We ask ourselves the question that I've said in all of my videos on written legal English is, what are we really trying to say? And if we ask ourselves that question, a number of things happen. Number one, we simplify the problem, we simplify the sentence. Number two, we put it into the active voice. This is a natural process. This is how English works. This is how we all think. As I said in the example to the first unit that I did on the subject verb object, people would say, I had breakfast this morning. This is normal and natural. It's an active sentence. No one would ever say breakfast was eaten this morning by me. This is simply not normal, not natural. No one would ever say it. So and it's the same idea when we're writing writing legal English, or indeed any English. We try to keep things as normal and as natural, but yet still professional as possible. There's nothing here in my breakdown which is informal or which is non-legal. It's businesslike, but it communicates the point effectively and quickly. And you read this once and you understand what's going on. And that's the main idea of communication or writing, is that you write something for the reader to understand. You wouldn't normally write something for the reader to read and be confused about, because that rather defies the object of communicating and writing, I would assume. You would write so someone understands what you're trying to say. And if we ask ourselves that basic main message, what are we really trying to say, then we get to that point, we get to that final result a lot faster. And this is something you might think that this is a little bit strange, but this is something that I've done with all of the lawyers that I've worked with at various different points. I get a text in front of me, I don't understand what's going on, so I phone up the lawyer, contact the lawyer, and I say, what are you really trying to say? And the lawyer says, well, what I'm trying to say is this. And I say, why didn't you just say that? Why didn't you write that down? I understand what you said to me on the phone, so why did you create this monstrosity, this monster on paper? And sometimes it can be as simple as that. Okay, thank you very much for watching this webinar. If you have any questions at all about what I've said, if you disagree with anything that I've said, then please get in contact. I'm happy to have the discussion. As I said, when you're correcting language, there's no right or wrong way to interpret language. There are just many ways to interpret language, which is why you have this many court cases, unfortunately, because some of them are language based, and the way that that language is put down on a piece of paper. So if you have any, if you agree with what I say, disagree with what I say, then please leave a comment in the video description below, and I'm happy to get back to you and have that conversation. Okay, I look forward to seeing you next week for another webinar where we'll have another look at some more texts to correct. Thank you very much and goodbye.